Welcome everyone. Thanks so much for coming, as always. I'm pleased to say that we're joined by Todd and Sacco, who are big players in the no-code space, super influential, who've made some amazing products before, and have been inspiring for my journey, and I know for many others. So I'm really grateful that they've come today to join us to share all their wisdom and knowledge on getting started in Webflow, and by the sounds of it, some exciting stuff on Bubble as well at the end, which I'm sure you're all excited for too. So I think the format is going to be super simple. I'll chuck it over to them, they'll take it from there, and then at the end we may have some time for some Q&As. Without further ado, I shall pass over to you guys, really looking forward to this one. Thanks again for being here.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
So actually, Max, I think last year, it was around this time that you started 100 Days of No Code. So it's actually really, really awesome to see how it all came full circle. And this is actually my second time, guys, participating. And this time I thought it'd be a good idea for my partner, Todd, and I to jump in together and do like a special session. We do a lot of jam sessions, work with a lot of clients around the world. And we've kind of developed a process of how projects get built. So today, if it's okay with you, Max, actually the type of format we had in mind is maybe Todd and I can have a conversation with each other the way that we usually do when we talk about Webflow or no code. And hopefully that will be insightful for you. So we can spend about 10 or 15 minutes talking about our approach, how we approach products, how we approach no code. And then I can actually show you some examples from very simple structures of how you can take core principles with Webflow. And then you can build really big projects like Civilization and the PlayStation prototypes and really outlandish things like that. But what we want to demonstrate today is that as long as you understand the core principles and the structure itself, you can actually build anything. But instead of limiting yourself to landing pages or just e-commerce experience and so on. So without further ado, Todd, first of all, people have heard a lot about me, but people don't know that you've actually been an inspiration for me coming up since the Proto.io days. So I'd love for you to come out of the shadows a little bit as my partner and as my friend. I mean, we met last year right after the PS4 actually prototype got launched in January, and then in February you messaged me, we started talking to each other a little bit, and then we hopped on a call and said we should do this thing called Protocore together. And then the rest is history. So why don't we just start over there and just to start this discussion? I'm so excited.
Like the quick call that becomes 4 hours, because we realize there's this energy and there's this jam and there's this almost like kind of really intense similarity with which we kind of approach product. And we both have been pushing tools to the limit, to beyond the limit. I have been kind of in the no-code space for many years with a tool called Proto.io, as Sacco mentioned, which is focused on more like a simulated environment for prototyping like iOS apps, more native apps versus Webflow's responsive website. And so I used to always, when people needed a website tool, I pointed them out. There's a division between like oriented around apps and websites. And so I had come to Webflow pretty early on in its days, from the first meetups and such, and followed its evolution, and just been very taken by the power, and like they actually finally were able to kind of sort of almost get to the holy grail of a visual layer onto the box model and actually generate out production level code. And so I've been very, very attracted to Webflow, used it for a range of sites. And I, thinking about like what Sacco was pointing to, kind of like the earlier days of trying to take, Proto.io to the limits. I did a lot of webinars and such, and I think Sacco kind of noticed and used some of them. I know Sacco used Proto.io to get an investment, and we just connected and really jam well, which is why today we want to kind of have kind of open up one of our jams to a crowd to kind of get a feel for how we approach product, and we use Webflow very fundamentally to that. And I've also been, and I'm also an entrepreneur. I had a couple startups over the years as like a designer entrepreneur. And I always, being a non-coder, always sort of struggled with being able to express my ideas, which I have many, with enough fidelity to kind of show what I mean, to put it into a user's hands to get the high fidelity feedback, which Proto.io allowed and Webflow allows, except for Webflow, these prototypes are real. And that's one of the kind of really core advantages of, Webflow is a prototyping tool beyond just a landing page tool, and just the sort of the customizable and just sort of infinite power of it is really key. And so it was interesting, just kind of lastly, on the morning I'm at Sacco, I was actually attending his Webflow masterclass just before ducking out to go to the Figma conference that was going on that day. I believe it was like February 6th of last year, just before the pandemic struck, one of the last few actual conferences that took place. But yeah, and I think that, one of the areas that I think in terms of like, where does Webflow really position itself in the space? There's a lot of folks that like, oh, when they want to design, go right into Figma. It's like kind of a knee-jerk thing, or previously to that, Photoshop. And then like, okay, now we need to go to the website environment. But, with the sort of pretty infinite power of Webflow as a design tool onto the fundamental structure of the web and limited by the web, it's like, hey, why not just jump right there and design in that environment? And sort of it's one of the things that is so key to think about with Webflow. And I just wanted to, touch on that a little bit, and we'll kind of jam on that more, but I wanted to hand it back to, or just to kind of have Sacco kind of take it from there a little bit.
No, that's a great starting point, because the reason we wanted to actually start Protocore, Max, is because the way products are designed today is fundamentally dated. Like it's still that same, traditional approach. You go to Figma and then you design your layout, or and then you go, or you just go raise a bunch of money and then you try to validate your idea or so on. So when we talked to Todd about this, we talked about like, okay, well, if one person could take the entire PlayStation 4 experience, put in Webflow in like a week, what does that say about the way you're developing MVPs or prototypes or ideas? It just fundamentally changes everything. Like, so we kind of realized that, just looking back, and Todd has, worked with large corporations. I've had my own experience working with corporations and startups and creating my own along the way. And we just realized that just every approach we've seen has just somehow been, could just benefit exponentially with no-code tools. We realized, what if we created a company that, number one, push no-code tools to the bleeding edge? Like, that's what that company was known for. It's like, there are no typical projects in this person's portfolio. It's like, it's just top to bottom is just like, you look at it like, how is this even possible? And that's really, where we've been going. And later in
being
April,
exactly untemplatized, and no pre-made components. It's very much this free form transcendent. And that's kind of like fundamental to Webflow, just kind of tying it back in there.
Exactly. And with Procore, we realized, okay, what's one way we could just completely like demonstrate like what Webflow or tools like this are, capable of. And we realized, okay, our website is going to be a literal rebuild of the Mac OS. So a complete rebuild of it. So protocore.co, it's coming soon. And it's like all of these individual apps that you have in the Mac have been rebuilt in Webflow. So you can just go and clone actually each project and just see how it all comes together. And we, a lot of companies took notice of that. And they're like, okay, we got to work with these guys. Like, so it was just like, let your work speak for itself. Like, instead of just going with a typical LinkedIn approach or, resume approach, just creating this kind of like shock and awe strategy, where it's like, you release one civilization or one PlayStation and everyone comes to you, as opposed to, let me go and try to chase after clients, for example. So that's another way of how fundamentally we started changing the way that an agency even would work, the way a company would work.
Like having it's like a hit, the notion of the hit, and then suddenly it's a magnet.
Exactly. Like letting, and also 90% give and 10% take has been a philosophy that both Todd and I have really believed in from the beginning. Like, a lot of people say, why are you making all these clonables free? I'm like, you don't understand. When you give more than you take, you build a relationship with your audience, the way that, 100 Days of No Code, for example, work. Like, when I see how much time and effort you put into it, and how in just 1 year, you've been able to take that from just an idea to a brand in the no code space, like that in itself speaks for itself. That already tells the story of how powerful, that engagement is, that relationship, that authentic relationship building really is, and we see many examples of that now in the community. So
yeah, and
that
I was
was
actually just quickly like just listening. I was like on a Clubhouse call the other day on talking about no code tools, and there was a lot of folks talking about the community of 100 days of no code and how it was just so kind of welcoming so much as a place to just feel it was just so advancing for people. And I just wanted to sort of throw that out there.
100%, 100%. And on top of that, you know, so pushing no code tools to the edge is one part of it. The other part of it is actually building a model on which products can be built, like really looking at how we can change that. So what we do now is with companies we're approaching, Webflow is at the heart of it, like the whole process. We've realized that we can actually use Webflow right from the start to the end of actually expressing the full idea of a product. Think about that. Like, you could design it in Figma or Photoshop or templatize it, if you will. Like, I like Todd is a wordsmith, so like he does come up with the best terms here. So like you can templatize it in a way, but you still have to depend on so many other tools to express your idea or your vision. Like, but with Webflow, what we do is now with clients that reach out to us, companies we work with, and we primarily target startups. Like, because we think like startups are in the most vulnerable state. They have the most potential, but they're also the most vulnerable because they have teams to look after. They have to raise investment and all these other things. Like, think about how many people raise investment today with pitch decks. Still in 2021, they're still using pitch decks, right? This is the fundamental problem that we're trying to change here. So, and this is just such a great segue into like what no code is and what it isn't, and what, you know, how we're approaching Webflow. So as an example here is, take a look at this. We start off with a 3-month cycle. The first month when we talk to a company is we start off and say, okay, let's just analyze your existing product, top to bottom. Let's just like dissect it, understand what the pros and cons are. Then the second month, let's go and approach how we actually, like, let's design the second version of this product. And then the third month, we give you a full MVP of that product, completely built in Webflow. So companies have seen this process and they're like, whoa, like, our other version that we were building took us 9 months just to get one alpha version out. And you guys went from version 1, version 2, MVP, prototype, the whole process. And what we also do, Max, is we actually document the entire process by recording every session we have with you. So you can actually see the whole process of how this product is made. So we kind of thought, what if we could systemize these tactics that we've used personally in our own development process and actually turn that into a actual system that others can use. So this is really what we're trying to do with Protocore, and also providing the educational material and the clonables to the community. So Todd, something that
yes,
I want to touch on is like, what is and isn't no code, right? This always comes up. Like, just recently, like, I hear this all the time. If I got a penny for each time someone said Squarespace is a no-code tool, I'm like, no, it's not. Like, if that's the case, then technically if Microsoft Paint could be considered a design tool because it has a pencil tool inside of it. You know what I mean? Like if that's the lowest common denominator, like then technically it's so ambiguous and so saturated where everything technically is a no-code tool. Photoshop is a no-code tool, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess at the core these days, no code is a meme. You know, that has sort of like over time, as memes do, they take on all these additional meanings and become somewhat meaningless in that process. But in terms of like fundamentally, it's about accessibility for where once for people like me and designers who don't code, or marketers, people with ideas, entrepreneurs, that before they had to rely on a developer and, you know, all the lost in translation, communication and expense therein, suddenly now through visual development tools that abstract away the symbolicness in the code, it suddenly gives people these superpowers to be able to just do it themselves and express ideas and like go much further down the field into actually iterating an idea and kind of achieving a fit with that. And so, you know, in terms of what is no code tools and what isn't no code tools, I think in terms of thinking where once you needed a developer to be able to do something with regards to a website, that now, like, you know, I came to Webflow like, wow, I was able to do this whole website. I didn't have to rely on anyone, and it just works. It is real. It's not just some prototype that's a simulation that I can just get some feedback on. It's actually launched and working and has transaction. There it is. And and then also where it's like now it's like also then just applications as well, web applications, and increasingly native applications. And so it's sort of pretty amazing what you can do. I mean, and then there's what it is not. It's, I don't know, just, it's interesting what it is not, what isn't, what it is not. What is
I've thought about this a lot. I've thought about this a lot because people ask me obviously a lot of the time, like, okay, so what's your definition? You know, and I'm like, okay, well, I think no-code tools in the simplest form, Max, I think this is actually the simplest way you could explain this to people is you just interact with code visually by clicking instead of typing. That's really what a no-code tool is fundamentally, right? It's all visual tools, Zapier or Webflow or any of these tools. Like, and what no-code isn't to me is, number one, a tool that isn't like, didn't require a lot of coding knowledge to begin with, like to do. Like Photoshop is not a no-code tool. Just because I can do something without code does not make it a no-code tool. Like it was a design tool from the beginning. Like, so that's doesn't fall in that category. Squarespace does not fall into that category for me because it is a design tool, yes, like but it's very templatized to a point where you're just basically following the rails. Like it's a, you know, it's just, you have, they're just holding your hand the whole way. So any even limited customization that you need, you need code to be able to do it. Like, which is why I see people spending $10,000, paying literally $10,000 to somebody to come customize their Squarespace template with code. So I'm like, it's not really a no-code tool. Any more than, you know, like I mentioned earlier, there were all these, you remember, Todd, we were talking about all these design, like small design experiences online, like create a brochure or something. I'm like, yeah, but would you compare that to a Photoshop? Would you compare that to a Figma? Like, is it correct to categorize that as a design software tool or suite? You know, it's not necessarily. It's more, you know, niche, if you will. So Webflow, to me, providing the amount of creativity, the amount of openness that you have as a non-developer to actually develop things that normally would require tremendous amount of development. That's what makes it a no-code tool to me. Does that make sense?
I think also like the word freedom comes to mind. Like, I feel like you go to Squarespace, you're very, you know, it's just, there's a certain inherent limitation and you're thinking within those limitations, almost not realizing that you have those limitations. Okay, this is my world, versus, you know, going into Webflow where it has the kind of power and flexibility of code, except it's just visual. And that's really where fundamentally it separates from the sort of componentized, pre-built componentized, templatized tools. While there, of course, are templates to jumpstart you, you can just go as far as you're free to roam, as far as you need to go, and like add just enough code as need be, but primarily it stays within your normal visual way. And it's just an amazing storytelling experience. You know, if we talk, what Sako and I were talking about, the different uses and use cases of Webflow. You know, there's like the standard, yes, it's for websites, or maybe there's the typical kind of marketing sites, brochure sites, or landing pages. And then there's a lot of these kind of like highly simple, like in e-commerce and CMS, and there's highly simple landing page builders that are like quick and easy, or like Software.io, et cetera. But there's the power and flexibility to create. I think like one of the greatest types of examples is like choreographed storytelling, where you have like on scroll the ability to really have a very rich, interactive, animated story on scroll. Like, you know, no thinking is required. You just scroll and then scroll back. And, you know, one of the features that they came out with about a year ago or so was being able to use Lottie animations and link that with the with scrolling, so you could literally scrub through an animation as you scroll to create what previously would have required a tremendous amount of JavaScript, D3, and all of this that can be like ta-da, like, you know, really quickly within Webflow. And it's just, I mean, empowering. The freedom and empowerment is really amazing.
I'm really glad you touched on that, Todd, because when people talk about use cases, I say, okay, like it kind of falls into like a few categories. Number one is what you just mentioned with the landing page, e-commerce experience, and so on. The second is prototypes. Something like Civilization 6, like that's an experimental, like giant prototype. It's not there's no logic behind it. It's just a prototype that really conveys your idea in the best possible way. And just recently, you know, Max, I don't know if you had a chance to watch the interview. We had the privilege of interviewing Sid Meier's from Firaxis, the creators of Civilization. Like he even mentioned, he's like, when I first saw this, it's like, I thought it was the actual game. Like, so technically, you know, we just had that discussion with Firaxis about like, what if like 20 years ago, you know, you could have just designed this prototype of your idea and took it to an investor, for example, right? And you could immediately get investment with something like that, as opposed to, you know, like Sid mentioned about how difficult it was to just express an idea, let alone, you know, decide if it was the right concept or not, right? And as a gaming company, you're gonna have to invest a ton of money actually, right, like figuring out like, should I go with this direction or not, you know? Right. So he just mentioned, yeah, go ahead.
You know, it's really, it's like, you know, it's, you know, gaming and prototyping in terms of, I think, particularly good example, as well as because there's so much investment that's necessary to really take a game to a point where, like, you know, tens of millions of dollars, like 10 plus millions of dollars in some Blizzard in some cases. But now, like with such prototyping tools that you can take a wide range of ideas at the very outset and explore them pretty deeply quickly. So at the end, you get a much better product because you're able to go deep in a wide array of products early and cheaply, so that you then whittle down to the one that you then say, okay, we've validated this. Let's go in the kind of code-centric development way. So it's almost like I have this kind of line I've been thinking about. It's sort of no code to validate, code to scale.
That's a good way to put it. And also, I mean, Max, like early on in my career, in my early 20s, like the first investment, the first $1 million I raised was with my own prototype. And the prototype was so dynamic that for 6 months, people didn't realize it was a prototype. You know, it just told a story about that product. And I realized like that philosophy, that approach to demonstrating your idea and expressing it, it was something many people didn't even know about. So that's why I just honed in on that skill. And I was like, this is what I want to really be about. This is what I think a lot of startups can just save themselves so much time, resources, and grief if they're just able to express their ideas correctly. And finally, that brings us to the third chapter, was MVPs. So actually building like no-code mentors, for example, nocodementors.com. We launched that last year during No-Code Rumble. And the idea was we want to build a mentorship platform where you can just schedule a call with a no-code mentor, an expert, and, you know, with Calendly, and you're done. It took us a week to build the whole thing. And except that can scale, guys, to like 10,000 mentors. Like you could go show that to an investor and say, here, I already have paying customers, I have whatever. And it was built for free. You're only paying for the hosting plan on Webflow. That is it. Like that to me is a formidable no-code tool. The fact that you could do something like that, which normally would have cost no less than $30,000, $40,000 to build in the past, you know? And this brings us to the hybrid model, the fourth category of why you would use Webflow. You would use it to build your front end in Webflow and then hook it up to your back end. So this backend could be AWS, it could be wherever you like. Like right now I'm working with a big company in China, for example, and they have this whole system, this search engine they built, but they want their team to really very easily manage their front end experience. You know, the CMS, the collections, the data, and so on. Like they don't want to, you know, worry about front end tweakings and stuff. Even big corporations are starting to realize that front end management is a waste of time. Like there is no way that any developer, any front end engineer could sit with me and my mouse and be able to compete with my mouse. It's just no way. Like the shortcuts, the flow, the whatever, like typing is just ridiculous. It's like, it reminds me, Todd, of like the early 90s when people were still debating like graphical user interface versus character interface. It's like, is that even a debate? Like that graphical is going to be so much more empowering, right? But I think that that's where the divide kind of happens, where we start to think that no code is competing against code, but it's not. It's empowering it. It's allowing you to visually interact with the same experiences that you would want to have to type. And there's always going to be a situation. You have to remember that ultimately, whatever no code allows us to do, some coder coded that experience. So coders are always going to be one step ahead of us. And I think that's a good thing. They get to test these experiences, validate them, and see how they come together, and then provide those experiences to us. And then finally, last but not least, we have the exporting functionality where you can build your experiences in Webflow. And then you can go ahead and export the whole thing out and then expand on it. Like I've seen projects start on Webflow and become 10 times bigger. Their development teams had a good framework to start off with, which says that as a no-code solution, Webflow is probably one of the few platforms that actually has done exporting correctly. So it doesn't pigeonhole you. Like Bubble, for example, I love Bubble, I love what they're doing, but they have no plans of exporting, to my knowledge. Like that's not something they're planning to do. So that's a very big problem. Like that, again, referring to your freedom quote right there, Todd, like that kind of limits me from the get-go and makes me wonder if I have a future in this platform, you know? So I think no-code tools right now, we need to kind of get off the hype train just a little bit. We need to be aware of what no-code is good for and what it's not good for. Don't tell yourself that you're going to be building, for example, Airbnb in Webflow. Even if you could, that's not the right experience. That's not the right platform for you to use, because there's so much that comes with building an Airbnb beyond the technology. Just because you can stitch it up with Zapier and have a bunch of other tools, MemberStack and whatever, that does not mean you've built Airbnb, because Airbnb is the customer experience. And there's so much that no-code tools don't provide, like keeping track of your customers, the satisfaction, the debugging, and all this other stuff. Like I've seen tools that have 12 different integrations in them, Bubble and Webflow and whatever. I'm like, this is great. You built something really cool, but can you debug this? Like if at any point, any one of these 13 duct tapes that you've put on the ship come loose and your ship is starting to sink, like how are you going to keep track of all this? Like it's kind of crazy. And just recently, Todd, I just saw the tweet
it's like almost a new role also for developers. Is that like ones who manage, like kind of go around as sort of like managing no-code tools for like, oh, I have this problem, I can't figure it out, or just augmenting it on the edges, where it's like primarily you're using no-code tools. And it's also just the releasing of the burden on developers to do low-level burden, stuff like, can you help me connect this API? That's now a thing of a past, fortunately, because of like Zapier and stuff.
The funny thing is, though, a lot of people asking about, hey, can you hook us up with the API? Don't even know what API means. It's just like there's so much. People say, like, you never need code. Like, but I think that people who get into no code eventually get passionate about code because they start to see the possibilities.
Yeah, especially Webflow. I think Webflow is the best example of this, because it's exactly a visual layer onto the fundamental structure of the web, where it's like the absolute best way to learn front-end development. And a lot of front-end developers have realized, it's just so much more efficient for me, kind of maybe swallowing the identity pride, if you will, and kind of being like, wow, this is just so much more useful. And it produces, clean, nice code. And it's a single place for both designers and developers to be within the same tool. As well, in the same environment. And I think there's a lot of mutual respect, and communication is much more clarified and et cetera. So one of the other
definitely. I think communication, like that's where also these tools really help with the community, like groups coming together that normally have a difficult time communicating. Like developers and designers are like cats and dogs. It's like a historic relationship of like just having a hard time communicating with one another. And I've just seen how just incorporating Webflow, like recently I convinced one company here in Thailand, for example, like they have a 100-person team and they used to use Squarespace and WordPress and all this stuff. And they moved to Webflow and the communication in that team just completely fundamentally changed. Like the fact that a non-developer could just put together these advanced interactions, for example, and share that with a developer and say, this isn't sort of what I want, this is exactly what I want. And you can just export that button or that function, and there you go, you have it. So without further ado, guys, everything I just described from the different levels of how you can use Webflow, I'm gonna show you that real quick now. And then please put your question together, and we'd love to answer you towards the end. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Let's start off with, first of all, guys, if you go to just webflow.com/protocore, just do like a capital P. I don't know why like Webflow is having a bit of a bug over here. Like if you do a small P, it just doesn't open for some reason. But anyway, so if you go in, you'll see kind of like the kind of array of type of projects that we do here. So let's go into the first. Let's go into an example of a prototype. What does that look like? So this is a prototype of an entire dashboard, for example, that you could just export as is with all its functionality, right? This is all done in Webflow, and this took about half an hour to do. Very easy to pull off. It's all based on a grid structure. I'll show you internally in Webflow how this works. And all of our projects are clonable, guys. So feel free to jump in, clone them, and see for yourself how the structures are done. So here you could just export this, right? And you could just hook this up, all these individual tabs to your API. And now you have a full system here in place for essentially managing your dashboard or your data. It's all done in one place. Another cool example of that is actually right here. We have, one second, where are we? We have,
and then of course you can, customize at will in terms of the styling and connecting it to brand, et cetera, very easily. As Webflow fundamentally is also like a really powerful design tool beyond
very powerful design tool. Like it's actually like I know certain designers, like they prefer to actually do it all in Figma and then kind of bring it to Webflow. But the thing is, there is a disconnect when you do it in Figma, because you're not seeing the real final version of it. But whatever I do in Webflow, I can just hit publish and I immediately see what it's going to look like, right?
Yeah, and that's a really good point. I just want to touch on that a little bit more.
Yeah.
Because when you're designing in Figma, you're not doing it within the sort of conditions and constraints of the way, like Sako was saying, is ultimately experienced and the way that things are positioned and flow happens. So because you can do so much, since you can do so much design in Webflow, it makes sense to go right there and then do that design with the interaction, thinking inside the box model,
exactly.
And then being able to publish it and see it. And so it makes so much more sense for a lot of situations. Just like before, at one point, people used to create buttons in Photoshop, right, as images, and versus just doing it right in CSS. It's kind of a corollary to that. But go ahead.
Here's another example of a prototype of like, this is a music player. You could just hook up all of these individual elements to whatever system you have, and there you go. So this is where a lot of companies start to take no-code tools more seriously. My gripe with the no-code showcase today is that most of the experiences are just landing static page experiences, where we, Todd and I both we see even landing pages as individual products, essentially. Like when you go into, like, this is one of the best story-driven kind of landing pages you could have, like Webflow versus Squarespace. This is Webflow's own design. Like, you just scroll down and look at how they tell their story, like fundamentally of like how this product came together, like how are they different from this company, or so on. You see how the bars just open up and tell you that, that comparison or whatever. Now go to Squarespace and see how they present theirs. Right?
Like beyond like the little like, oh, here's the sort of comparison chart module to like, I mean, that's like exactly the kind of situation where you have this freedom and power and control to create something completely custom like that versus the sort of off the shelf component for a product comparison.
And the best part of it is one person could do this. And someone said, well, why don't you move to Squarespace? I said, listen, the day that I can design Squarespace's landing page in Squarespace, I'll go use Squarespace, but like I can't even do their own landing page there. So let's go into,
because Webflow is definitely made in Webflow, as it says.
Yeah, definitely Webflow is made in Webflow. So let's move now into MVP territory. What is an MVP? An MVP is functional. It has logic. This is something that demonstrates your core idea in its simplest form. So here, for example, I took Apple Notes. This took 1 day to build. And I just put a form here and I hooked it up to Zapier. So I built a CMS. So you can just kind of like hook it up and you can see like, what's possible here. And all of these are individual CMS items essentially, right? So when you click on them, it just takes you to a dedicated page with that particular Apple, that note, that Apple note. Now, how it works is I could say, hello from 100 days of no code by Luis. That's good light in Armenian.
Oh, nice.
And now all I have to do is just refresh the page, and the new note is going to be right here. So right now, for whatever reason, Zapier is just being a little weird, but generally it takes 1 or 2 seconds and your new note is already there in the list. So what you can do now is you can just go into whichever note you've just tapped into. Let's say, I have a dream, for example, and boom, there's your note. It took 1 second to open. And you have that entire note the way you wanted it, right in one place. And you can have, you know, full functionality here. You could have, you know, styling options. You could do whatever you want to do. And this right now, this clonable that we have here, guys, you could take this MVP, put a password lock on it, and use it as your own note-taking app right now. So that's a classic example of, again, what's possible with these tools. That if I wanted to, you know, demonstrate my idea to let's say Apple, I could just show them that. So actually, I just realized why the Zap isn't coming through. It's because with the free Webflow account or free Webflow project, you can only have 50 form submissions. So people have been submitting so many forms, testing out this concept that's why it's not coming in. So that's another example. Then you have the full, you know, basically the bleeding edge example where it's like, okay, we can literally take 12,000 elements and just build out an entire prototype of a game, and that's Civilization 6. And then from there on, you know, you could build entire features out. So this is another way to look at it. Like if I wanted to build out a magnifying effect, you know, I could just test out my idea directly in Webflow. This takes 2 minutes to build. That's it. Super, super fast and easy to do.
And it's just done natively right in the tool.
Completely natively. So I just want to give you guys kind of this quick kind of expo of like, okay, this is how abstract you can get with it, right? You could basically build Apple TV if you wanted to directly in Webflow, you know? And this is one advice I want to give you guys is please, when you're getting into a new tool like this or any other tool, try to build something that already exists. Don't try to just take your idea like a landing page or something. Like try to build something that like WhatsApp or Apple TV or something, because it already gives you a predefined set of objectives. It says, this is how it needs to look. Here's the animation, you know, here's this, you know, effect or whatever. And it gives you the right questions to ask. Like when you're building something like this, you have to ask yourself like, okay, like, how do I get this effect? How do I get the motion? How do I get whatever? And it just gives you so much experience when you build it out. So when I was first getting started, I was building out, you know, the software suites, like prototype ideas and so on. And I was like, it just taught me so much. And once you break out of that, out of those initial tutorials and courses, once you've learned the rules, you can start breaking all the rules and start creating games and other really crazy concepts, you know? So now
there's a great example, just quickly, like a great example of some folks that recreate some of the Apple launch pages that have that really kind of really amazing choreographed storytelling, and then make it clonable. So you can kind of really see how that's done if I can break it down and put it back together. I mean, but there's also, you know, one of the things, the little warnings is like, it requires a lot of often assets that you have to like pull out. So that's something to consider in rebuilding to deal with if you can.
Absolutely, absolutely. One thing, so let's jump into a project now real quick, guys. Okay, let's get you really quickly introduced. I know most of you probably already know the basics, but for those who don't, since this is a beginner's introduction to Webflow, I just want to give you an idea of where things are and how you need to kind of think about when you start a project in Webflow. So this is a really simple project. Boom. The idea is pyramidion. So if you don't know, pyramidion is actually the very top of a pyramid. So I had this idea of like, you can actually move it around, you know, like this. Had this kind of cool concept in mind. And, you know, there are other cool concepts too you can explore, like things like this, where, you know, it's like the Gate of Time from the Zelda game, for example, like really simple concept. But when you look at it, you're like, okay, but how is this possible? How is this moving? But in reality, guys, if you really look closely, it's just basically the same images, just stacked on top of each other with an absolute Z index. You know, you're just setting them up and then you're adding an interaction. So when the mouse moves to the left, this one moves a little faster than the other, and that's it. But see, that's the point you need to get to, where you can just look at an element or look at a project and you can already get an idea of how it's structured. Let's take another idea. Let's take, for example, native photo masking, right? Here, what you have is essentially two photos. You just have one big section with a photo inside of it. And then you have the colored version of that photo in this particular div, in this section, which is set to a particular width and height, and the overflow is just set to hidden. So when and then you just set up an interaction saying when the mouse moves to the left, move the picture to the right, and vice versa. So what happens is actually this photo in the background is actually moving, but you're not seeing it because as you move to the left, it makes sure to keep that photo perfectly stacked on top of the other. So it's just a really fun little technique. So this is why it's really important now. I'm going to give you the best advice you've ever gotten in Webflow. Seriously, the best advice. Think of everything as a box, literally everything. Everything is a box within the box within the box. If you understand that philosophy, then you can build absolutely anything.
Yeah. In short, think inside the box.
Yes, literally think inside the box. Because if you think about it, any website layout, right? Whether it's this project or it's Webflow's website, or here's another website, you know, structure that we have here, whatever it may be, it's all boxes. Like there's nothing, like here's a box, here's another container, here's another div. So when you understand that, you no longer ask yourself, how was this built? You start to ask more precise questions like what elements were used? How was this stacked? How was this placed on top of that element? Like in the case of Civilization, for example, guys, this is literally the most complicated project in Webflow, like right now, right? It's basically all of them, all of these elements are all stacked on top of each other. Everything that you see here, from the credits that are rolling, to the benchmarks, to the menus, to the tutorial video that just popped up over here, like everything is on top of each other. So if you understand placement and boxes, everything else is possible. And usually if you look in the forums, you're gonna realize that most of the issues people actually have with Webflow is they don't understand placement. Like here we have a bunch of keys, right? So let's just look at this project, Todd. Here what we have is a section right in the body, and it's just section is just set to obviously 100%, you know, width. It's just automatically, the width is automatically set to be full width, and 100% viewport height, which means no matter what screen size you have, guys, it's going to be 100% of that size. So here we have a section, and inside of it we have these cubes, just a little smaller than each other. So we start off at a solid 800 pixels by 800 pixels, very simple, and it's set to absolute. So absolute means you can position it on top of everything else. It just floats basically. That's the simplest way to think of it. And now we have 1, 2, 3. And as it goes down, notice how it goes down by 50 pixel increments, 650, 600, 550, and so on. And each one is stacked automatically on top of the other. Now, all we have to do now is go into our interactions and you say on page load, rotate. And here we have this rotating animation. And here you have all the cubes basically laid out. That's it. It's one simple interaction. The rotation happens at a particular duration. So each duration changes, again, by basically half a second increments. So half a second, 1 second, 1.5 seconds, 2 seconds. And that's where you get this effect, where they just stop one after another and you get that effect. That's how that happens. So now what you have is, first of all, they're rotating by 360 degrees here, or 359 to be precise. So you have that reset where after it's finished, they all get reset. And then once it stops, it just restarts over here and you have that same animation set to loop. That's it. So it's just a simple interaction and you have a mouse move over viewport interaction right on top of it. And that's how you get this effect of this entire pyramid basically moving. All that's happening though, in reality, is you have these cubes just moving with each other to the left and right based on your mouse movement. Really, really simple. Now, let's go back to the structure. Every page, every website, whatever you have should start off with a section, and then you have the div elements inside of it. After that, everything else is essentially just adjustments. How do I place it? Where do I move it, right? So let's just jump from this project real quick to this project. Now here we have an actual prototype. Notice how the structure is, again, you have just a section, right? And the section is centered to align and justify to the center. So we want the full prototype to be just in the center of the page. And then you have an image. This is the background image essentially. And you have a window right here. This is the main window. And I've set it to, 1000 width by 700 pixel height. And it's, again, it's set to absolute because I want it to be floating on top of the background image. What you could have done is you could just set the section itself to a background image, but if you want to do like a parallax effect or something like that, you want it to be a little separate. So here with the window, I can just open that up. And here I have essentially just a grid, guys. Like, let's take a look at that real quick. It's just broken into 3 parts. You have part number 1, part number 2, part number 3. And I can just move these around as I see fit. I can do whatever I want with this. So let's go back here. We have also a div element over here at the bottom, which is the main player. So we have a top grid and a bottom little player, section within this window. So this window is just set to be automatically, vertically stacked. And these two elements are just appearing below it. So again, a box within a box within a box. You're just stacking. That's all you're doing, is just figuring out how to put something below, above, left, or right of that element, or directly on top of it. Let's go back into the wrapper. Here we have this first div block, which is set again to vertically aligned to the left, and just a fixed width of 200. And now inside of it, you're again just stacking it one on top of the other. You have this nav wrapper. Let's open this up, keep this open actually, easier for you. We have this div block here. We have this toolbar that's 100 pixels by 60, and I've just moved it again to the left. So you have the, the dots. Then you have the nav wrapper directly below it. And we have a little bit of padding, a little bit of, padding on left and right, left and top. The width is set to 100%, and the height is set to 430. Nice, precise height. I want it to look exactly this way, right? You have your heading, you have your nav buttons, just stacked again, one on top of the other. And then if we open the nav button itself, we have an image on the left, and we have a title on the right. So the nav button is stacked horizontally. Now, centered horizontally. So again, all I did was created another box within those other 4 or 5 boxes, and I just decided, do I want this to be horizontal or vertical? The exact same formula that I'm telling you right now, guys, is what I used for something as broad and complex as civilization, which we're going to take a look at as well right now. So
and just quickly, like this project, like really highlights, like in terms of thinking within the box and designing within Webflow, because like thinking within this structure and positioning versus just the kind of grouping at will, if you will, in Figma. And so you almost have to kind of restructure it if you pull it into Webflow. Why not just structure it properly with regard to how it'll be experienced in the first place? So I think it's a really good example of why it makes sense to just go here, after paper and the initial just basic design, to just when you get digital, to avoid the knee-jerk reaction of jumping into Figma or whatever and go right into Webflow because of being in these conditions.
Yeah, and here's the thing. This is why I like it. I can just literally click on preview, and that's it. I can see my project, exactly how it's going to look and how it's going to work.
Right, and so there's no room for misunderstandings is something that you used to say often when you operate this way.
Yeah, there's no room for misunderstandings. What you see is what you get, and especially with clients, like for the freelancers and designers in the house, like you're always going to end up in a situation where your client might say, I don't like this, or this isn't how I thought it was going to be. Well, it's like, well, if it's in Webflow, I'm sending you exactly the version of what it's going to be. So when you say, oh, I really like that button, I take that as he really likes that button. There's no room for interpretation anymore.
Right. And when you look at it on your phone, since Webflow fundamentally, we haven't mentioned the word, but it's responsive website and web app builder, or probably website builder. And so always thinking within those ways.
Exactly. So now from there, let's go into like the final kind of preview of like, what does a completely bloated, gigantic project actually look like in Webflow? Like, how far can you take this platform? Notice how, first of all, it's very slow. That's one of the problems you're going to run into when you try to build, 1,000 elements on a single page. So bear with me here.
Freedom has a price sometimes.
Yeah, freedom does have a price. So let's go into the body here for a second. Let's just expand this. Like, notice how, again, everything is structured as a box within a box within a box here. So this welcome screen, for example, right? It's an overlay on top of the menu, on top of the actual game. So this is structured, again, as a welcome screen, just 100% by 100% set to absolute. And I give a Z index of 10. So I want it to be floating on top of everything else. I don't want anything else to be overlapping it, right? Next, you have the wrapper itself within it in the middle. So notice how, again, I just aligned everything to the center vertically. So now you have the wrapper. Then I opened up again, and now I have the circles as their own wrapper. And then I have the logo below it. I have the message below that, and I have the Get Started button. And that is all basically one box structure. You could take the exact same structure, now open up home, and notice how here you have a whole menu structure now. So you have all these other elements inside of it, but it's using the same formula, exact same formula. So what I would strongly recommend, guys, is take a piece of paper rather than Figma. When you want to structure your idea, Just look at a website or whatever design you have in mind and just create that blueprint of like, this is a box, this is a div, this is a section, this is whatever. Right now, at this point in my career, at this point, when I look at Webflow or any other, design tool or no-code tool, I don't need to go anywhere else. I literally just close my eyes and I can already tell you, like, this is how this is structured. Like, so if you want to get to a point where you feel you want to tell yourself, I'm very comfortable with Webflow, that is your litmus test. Can you go right now to apple.com or any other website and just look at the structure and say, this is how it's structured? Like here, I already figured it out. Like here, you have an absolute, see how it's floating? This is obviously as an absolute, and it's just fixed to the top of the screen. And this is just an element that, just gets hidden when you click on the X. Here you have a grid system, or you could just use a div block system. So you could just have, one big box here, give it a size, give it a width, whatever you want to do. But this is actually one of the simplest websites you could possibly create with Webflow. It's super, super simple. It's literally boxes. The entire thing is a collection of boxes when you look at it from a design standpoint, So let's go back to just wrap up here so we can jump into questions. We have the main sections over here. We have the loaders, we have the mobile view, and so on and so forth. In addition to these elements, something I really like about Webflow is how all these elements have English names. Like, it's very easy for me to, even if I don't know how to use Webflow, I know what a paragraph is. I know what a heading is. Even the iconography really helps you understand, And that's also what I define as a no-code tool. Can someone who's never used any sort of, serious kind of design tool or coding platform, can they understand it? Like BuildBox is a good example of that. They really found a great way of bringing games together for like building games with no-code tools. There is not a single word in BuildBox that, is complicated or like, I don't understand it. They really brought it down to layman terms where a 5-year-old can understand it, or an alien or someone who doesn't speak English can understand it. That's also really important. But when you look at something like Clutch or Builder or some of these other really advanced no-code tools, they're not really no-code to me. They're high code, like they're low code, if you will, that term, where you kind of have to understand what APIs are. You have to kind of understand what these tools are. So I think no-code is
Sacco, on that note, there's like a key question that someone asked, like, how do you folks decide which platform to pick for a project, like Webflow versus Bubble? It seemed like, connected to what you're talking about right now.
Oh, yeah.
There are a few parameters that you look at in particular.
Yeah, definitely. I would not use Webflow for creating like full-on applications, like ever. Like if it's like, sure, you can have some member stack integrations. Like a good example is actually swipefiles.com. We built this last year as well for Corey Haynes. Shout out to Corey. Fantastic platform, great tool. With Swipefiles, basically it's a resource for marketers. So you could just sign in, for example, you could just let me see here. Let me just log in real quick so I can show you the experience. Okay, boom. Like this is integrating JetBoost and a few other tools. So you could just go in and you have all these teardowns. So he just basically breaks down what makes these, makes these marketing websites or landing pages or, emails really great. So it's all powered by the Webflow CMS. And you have favorites, the ability to see updates about the platform. You can even favorite your, favorite tools here. You can just, your favorite teardowns. We have JetBoost for advanced filtering and searching. So you can just say SAS, for example, and boom, it just automatically filters it for you. So this is a great example of like, sort of like a showcase experience. Like it's not too complicated. You can have a profile system, right? This is a simple member stack experience here, But if you try to add a little more complexity to this, it may no longer be viable. You're going to have to go into coding territory. Another example is, we mentioned this earlier, no-code mentors. Like, yeah, it is a no-code solution, but if you try to add gamification, like tracking, memberships or tracking what users are doing, how many calls has someone had as a mentor on this platform, all of that, you cannot do any of that with Webflow. And you will very quickly hit a limit where you start to realize that, oh shit, like maybe I should have picked a different stack. So what I would say is no-code tools to me are great for, let's say, static to mid-dynamic experiences, like what Todd mentioned earlier about e-commerce, showcase websites, maybe like simple simple experiences like this, like products. Like this is no longer a landing page. It is a product. Swipe files is a product, but it's a simple product. You know, it's more of an informational product. Or maybe you want to have a checkout system. Maybe you want to sell some digital goods. You could go do that. But if you want to go build something like, you know, signing in, signing up, you know, inputting a lot of data, like controlling your profile system, like, you know, maybe changing even something as simple as changing your profile picture. Webflow is not a good tool for that. And if you end up using it, you're going to have so many hookups and link ups to get over that limit. Just recently, Todd, you remember before our call, actually, I mentioned that I just saw a tweet from Ben Tossell that MakerPad already reached its CMS. Yeah. Like 10,000 CMS items is the limit. So they've already reached that point now. So now the question is like, if MakerPad, which has so many hookups and they have investments and they just got acquired, you know, by Zapier and so on, it's like, if they're having limitations now, it kind of tells you like, you need to be careful. Like you need to know when to use it, when not to use it. I would also use it ultimately for proving concepts, for validating my ideas. That is really my forte when it comes to Webflow. That's what I love doing with it. This is not just, you know, let's say on a level of, I just want to create a prototype, but it can actually be an entire MVP like No Code Mentors. And they're much more sophisticated, you know, tools like Unicorn Factory, you know, shout out to Unicorn Factory team. It's a full job hunting platform. Like you can, you know, list your jobs, find a job. It's all done with Webflow, but and a lot of these no-code tools. But again, when you talk to them, they'll tell you about the limitations that they have. So over time, guys, we are definitely going to overcome a lot of these problems, a lot of these limitations. No-code is very young still, but just please be aware of those limitations. And I think by being more aware of it, you'll find solutions for it. But I've heard people just say, no, like, you know, you should never use code, just no code all the way and whatever. I'm like, listen, that's great when you're having a sermon on Sunday. But on every other day, when you have to talk to clients and talk to companies and implement these tools, it's not as effective. You know, you have to be aware of these limitations. And I'll just wrap up now on this Zoom rebuild that we did last year. This took just 2-3 hours to do. Like, again, a concept that we could validate here. I kind of packaged it in a little teaser for the Mac OS that's coming out. So you can already see a little peek of what's coming. But essentially here, this is my interpretation of Zoom. And people liked it so much that actually they started reaching out to Zoom, and we had a back and forth about this actually turning into its own kind of widget, a Zoom widget, or like a theme for Zoom. So here you can notice how I used a little bit of code to be able to capture my camera already directly coming in. So this is a good example of how you can combine code and no code to tell, you know, expanded stories. And in the case of just interactions, I also wanted to make sure I get a chance to show you that. You have in Webflow, you always start off on the left. You put your elements in the page. You can turn them into symbols if you want to reuse them. You have your layers as we looked at earlier. You have your page settings all in one place. You have your CMS items. You have your e-commerce experience. You have all your assets in one place, very easy to manage, and you have your basic search settings. So this is all you need to understand. You're going to be using elements, you're going to be using your layers, and you're using your page settings primarily for everything you do. And then on the right, you're just, whatever you click on, you're going to be styling. So styling options aside from flexing, like flex and grid box is what most people get confused about, and having your absolute settings here, like understanding these positioning options. If you understand this and Flexbox, everything else is peanuts, like radius, opacity. Those are toys, basically. You don't have to even worry about that stuff too much. Here you have your classes, your main, I should not have clicked on that. There are so many classes in this project that was definitely not the right move. Let's go back over here, the simpler projects.
Suck, one thing I wanted to add is also just, you know, in addition to structure,
Yes.
the vital importance of good naming.
Yes.
And CSS style naming, as you know, with the cascade and such, because you can go a little crazy if you don't name things well. or like use the default naming. So it's sort of as important as structure as naming as also extremely important in this way. So
yes, that's
really,
very, very important.
Really focus on that.
In the case of classes, actually, I'm glad you brought that up. Use English names, use clear names to describe everything, like a cube. You know, don't call this like C127 or some, you know, weird underscore, whatever. Like, just come up with names that someone, when you export this project and give it to someone else to use, it's just obvious. It's like, what you see is what you get. This is a cube. At most, why not call it a white cube if you really had to like describe it in that way? You know,
it's not div 31.
It's not div 37 or something. Exactly. You know, and then if you want to style it, just add a subclass to style it. These are all little techniques that you can use in your projects. You know, that's a little more advanced for today. But it's again, the simple techniques you need to know about is positioning, displaying the layout, classes, just have a clear class structure, have a clear box model, like a section, and then, you know, elements inside of it. And then finally, for interactions, just, again, this is something that I know can get a little confusing for people, but just, again, use the same conventions, like the structure. Look at how everything kind of has like a step-by-step kind of flow. Like, first this happens, then this happens, you know, with durations. Like, just think of it in algorithmically. And that's going to help you a lot with your animations. I know we're going a little bit over time, so I want to make sure we have time for questions, but I hope that was useful.
Yeah, that was amazing. Yeah, the civilization is one of the rare things that gets better every time I see it.
Except when it crashes your computer.
Yeah, yeah, that's not so good. But I think we've got a few questions in the chat. So
there was a follow-up question about, like, you know, trying to create a community website for creators with a viral element, where the element is a slot machine that spins out random information links for users when they spin it, and been mulling over choosing the right platform, Bubble or Webflow, and going to go with Webflow because Bubble may be overkill for that.
Yeah, I was about to say, like, knowing, like, even though some tool could be right for it, it could also be overly complicated. Like, so, you know, that's an uphill battle. That's a big commitment going into Bubble. I know Bubble is working on a new design, a new UI UX. So I'm looking forward to that. Hopefully it'll be simpler to use things. And I'm also looking forward to that, to dropping my little secret Easter egg at the end. But but I would say for applications, guys, gaming, anything that has logic, basically, like when the user does this, this should happen. Like that kind of stuff, do not use Webflow for that. Go straight to Bubble or like some other tool that's similar to like Clutch and Builder and so on. But just be careful because logic means programming. It means APIs. It means telling the system what to do. So it may not be as simple at first when you look at it. So,
and in some cases, if it's just one, you know, discrete piece, maybe like kind of just enough code, adding a little, like an element to a little code to Webflow can do the trick. It sounds like in this case that would be the way to go, because with Bubble you lose this sort of really beautiful design-centric user experience.
Design doesn't work.
You get an incredibly powerful logic and application capability, but at that cost. And I guess they've been working on the design and such. So.
But I just want to add on that in Civilization, actually, Max, I don't know if you had a chance to go into the settings of that of the project, into the actual like page settings, but there's a bunch of custom code, like the music, for example, controlling like when the user clicks here, start the video or stop the video. That's a good example of, I didn't have to go to Bubble to do that. All I had to do was use a little bit of code logic and I'm good. You know, like, so just knowing when to use it, when not to use it, when to like maybe pass on a feature. Like maybe I shouldn't be using this idea. Maybe it would like slow down the experience. That's really the, you know, hallmark of a good Webflow developer or any kind of developer. You know, the same kind of question comes up when you're doing a traditional website, building a traditional app. Is like, it's always a give and take of performance. Like, do I really need this right now? Like in the case of in the Civilization, the funny story, I don't know if I told you this last year, was I actually wanted to add like there were additional like setting pages and screens I want to add, except the project was so big at that point that I realized I had to spend a week removing some of the things I added just so the project would open like in the browser. So I was like, you know what, that's just called overkill. That was unnecessary, sir.
And also there's some great resources for adding kind of just enough code, like codecrumbs.com. Also, FN Suite has their Webflow hacks, which are like 40 or so hacks. So those are two really good collections of ways to add, some lines of code to just augment as needed to get these extra capabilities.
Yeah.
I've just seen a question in there around, if Webflow is not a tool for logic, does Civilization not contain any logic? I think you've already answered that to some extent.
Yeah, Civilization is a full prototype. It has basic logic. So, but the way that Todd, should I open up the Pandora's box with the Lord of the Rings game, or should we drop a bomb today? Or what do you want to do?
I don't know if there's the time for that. There's not bomb dropping buffer.
Let me do the Easter egg then. Let me do the Easter egg. So actually, guys, this is something that actually stumped the Webflow team, but we managed to figure out a way to actually implement actual game logic in Webflow. And it's all done with basic interactions, like basic, and for those who kind of like get, again, the box within the box idea, this is a good example of that, of knowing the rules and then breaking it. So all we did was we set up a CMS where it's a match pairs, game, simple concept, but very beautifully implemented. So the idea is that when you match a pair, the system has to reveal a clip from the movie of Lord of the Rings, So it's a really nice, fun game, and you get to play through all 6 movies. So it's a really like full feature length, the first full feature length web game made in Webflow. So what we had to figure out was, how do you tell the system if the game is over? Or like all 6 pairs, let's say there's like, 6 pairs of cards, so 12 cards in total. How do you know, like, if 2 pairs of cards have been flipped, or 4 have been flipped, or what 6 have been flipped? So what we did was we just took a div element and we placed it 100% outside of the canvas, outside of the actual viewport of the page. And we said that each time a user connects a particular pair, it brings that box just 10% or whatever particular percentage closer to the viewport. So when you do it 6 times, it just brings the div block inside of the canvas and triggers when it appears in the viewport, trigger this interaction, and boom. Now just take that same concept and apply it to just countless levels of logic that you could pull off. Like, when this appears, then that should happen and that should happen. But that's a cool hack. But when you go to Bubble and you can do the same thing in 2 minutes, you're just like, was this whole hack necessary? Like, did I need to go through this? Why do this when I can just, do that? Like, it would have been so much simpler. So it just figure out if, how deep you want to go with that logic. But yeah, Civilization is primarily, is just a prototype, but just very detailed.
Awesome. Cool. I think maybe we've got time for one more question, and probably pushing it, but how are you guys for time? And then, because I know you want to share your Bubble nugget as well at the end. So maybe let's get to Joseph's question, and then we can hear that. So what resources do you use for assets when creating sites, like graphics and visuals? Do you work with outside designers creating them, or create them yourself? That's from Joseph.
Okay, I'm trying to understand, like, specifically, like, just in general, how we create assets, or how we manage them. I'm trying to understand.
Feel free, Joseph, to just come off mute and ask it yourself as well, to go into a bit more depth. Creating.
Joseph, are you with us? He's muted. We can't hear you.
Mic isn't working.
Okay, all right. Let me answer both then. In that case, for me, I use flaticons.com for iconography usually, or for a lot of assets. In the case of bigger projects, we have companies that already provide the assets, or in other cases, we just create ourselves. So Photoshop is my favorite tool still until today. I started when I was 5. My dad spoiled me with Photoshop. So that he got me into no code very early. So I use that. And also for asset management, please use actual English names. Like, I cannot stand it when I see it like a, image, whatever, 2027 or whatever. It's just like, I can't manage this. So especially when you want to search for an asset, You know, like take the extra minute, you know, few minutes, whatever you have to, just write them, come up with clear names for it, and go from there. Also keep in mind that Webflow has the feature to actually delete all unused assets. So you can actually clear up your project and manage it and, you know, do some spring cleaning, especially towards the end of the project. You can also clean up your classes that way and your interactions that way. So you don't have to actually go one by one through the whole system. So I would say managing your project is actually half the work. The other half is building it. So often I'll end up in a like, even it surprises me that Webflow even allows a lot of premium templates in the template ecosystem there that are very badly managed. Like there are all these, you know, unnecessary classes and all these layers. And I'm just like, I looked at one of these projects a client wanted to work on a few years ago. It was so complicated. I was like, let me just build this template for you from scratch, man. Like I can't deal with this structure. This is just insanity. So I hope I answered your question.
Awesome. Cool. I think yeah, I think it's time to reveal this nugget that you guys want to show, if that's okay. Yeah, so that we can wrap things up. Yeah, how does that sound?
Sounds great. So I'm gonna have to figure out how to say this. So we can't show it to you yet, but it's coming just within weeks. The idea is that right now, a lot of these workflows, automations that you guys are doing, whether it's in Webflow, like you're trying to build, you know, containers and landing pages and whatever, or in Bubble, you have these entire workflows that you have to repeat over and over again. Basically, we've come up with an extension where you could just do that entire workflow once, and then you just have all those actions completely saved, and you can just click on play, and automatically it does it for you in 1 second. So no cloning, no templates, no nothing. You're literally saving the logic directly in your browser. And you could just go ahead and just, in Bubble, for example, like even if I watch an entire tutorial, right, Max, like a whole, like, how do I build this thing? It's like, okay, I watched it, but now I have to go do it. It's still going to take me 4 hours to do it. Like it's not, it doesn't make it faster because I know how to do it. It just makes me less depressed that now I know at least how it's done. So I think in this case, it would just speed up your entire workflow exponentially. Like you would come back and basically you're going to have this entire ecosystem of all these workflows that are entirely like already built for you essentially. And instead of saving hundreds of projects in your Webflow account or your, you know, in your Bubble account, you would just have basically this whole directory of all these actions that you could just turn on at any given second. And in my case, like think about how I set up a Webflow project, right? You want to set up the colors, you want the style sheet and the classes and stuff. What if I could just create all that entire process, that entire, I could do it once, and all the steps would be in actual code. It would be saved. And I could just go ahead and implement all of the same steps instantly without having to do it again. The way we do it right now is archaic. We actually go and save them as actual templates or, you know, projects. Like I do that all the time. I have hundreds of clonable projects now where I'm like, where was that form I really liked? I got to go copy that form.
Yeah, like kind of speaking of Webflow, kind of like the, I mean, speaking of Photoshop, sorry, kind of like a Photoshop action or kind of like macros, kind of reminiscent of, and these sorts of whole, like just like flow libraries, if you will. Think about them. That's great.
Vin actually I just realized Vin asked, does the Apple Notes example have no logic? It does have logic. It's hooking up with Zapier to send the forms back in and so on. So there is actually logic. Yeah, I think ultimately what we're trying to do with Todd is not just educate the community or build really cool websites and stuff, but actually like find ways to simplify the entire way that we actually operate.
Yeah.
And I think that extensions like this, and FinSuite, I mean, shout out to Joe Krug, has been a big inspiration for me, especially for this, is they've been creating so many powerful integrations for Webflow and the CMS and how to, you know, customize and so on, or custom scroll bars and so on. That's so powerful. And I think that's really the power of no-code tools, is like, once you're comfortable with the ecosystem and you understand how these tools come together, you start to put them together like Lego pieces instead of thinking it in this closed, you know, I'm either this or I'm a this. Like, stop thinking of yourself as a Webflow developer and just think of yourself as a maker and make some really great stuff, great products out there.
Yeah, that captures it well.
Yeah, that's a really nice note to end on. And will you tell us when this thing will be announced or revealed or shared to the world?
April.
Nice.
We've been working really hard on it, and I think like the beauty of it is that it actually is not tied. It's platform agnostic. So you could actually go and you could create your own workflows if you wanted. Like it's just literally, you know, clicking around, recording your clicks and knowing exactly what you want to build. So the precision is just there. Like you could at any time go and edit it and share it with the world. And so it's kind of like Giphy for software. So I think it's going to be pretty interesting for you guys.
That sounds like a game changer. Yeah, it's super excited. Well, yeah, thanks so much for your time. Is there anything you want to leave everyone here on? Any final words that you want to share, Todd or Sacco, before we wrap up?
Todd?
Yeah, final words. Yeah. Yeah, first of all, thank you very much. This has been a really great session and really great jam. Yeah, I mean, just kind of just go forth and get your hands dirty and just sort of go create. And I like, you know, Sako was saying, kind of take something, try to recreate it, break it down, get to the point where you're creating hacks, and you know, get to the point, to that level where you're just going beyond what's just presented obviously, as to really sort of really understand something fluently and viscerally and get to that point. And it's something to really strive for.
Yeah, and I would share my kind of controversial, maybe hopefully not as controversial feedback, that web design is dead. Product design is the future. Like web design used to be cool, you know, like when we were, you know, we had websites. The first time we saw, you know, think about the first time you saw Hotmail, first time you saw Yahoo or whatever. You know, those times are gone now. Like web design now is really about, it's really boiled down to recycling existing layouts and structures and websites. So product design is about telling a story, like really like engaging with the user, building a contextual experience, like personalizing your product. So like use Webflow to test as many ideas as you want, validate your ideas. Please stop using pitch decks, start building a prototype of your idea, go raise some amazing investment, build some amazing products for people. And most importantly, don't be afraid of building this in public. Build it in public, share the process. You will get so much support from this community. And this is just such a great example of like Max, you know, doing 100 days of no code. Like the whole point of 100 days of no code was so people could see your process. They could enjoy your work. They could see what you're doing and join in, hopefully. So, and don't feel like, well, my idea, like what if someone steals it? I'm like, listen, everyone, there's thousands of ideas out there. Everyone's building in real time. If I wish that people would have so much time to be able to steal your idea. People have so much ADD, they barely have time to focus on their own ideas. So, and just remember that, you know,
that's a really good point.
Yeah, the heart that you put in your product, it really tells. You know, my dad said, like, tell me who your friend is, I'll tell you who you are. I say, show me your product, I'll tell you who you are. Like, put yourself in your product, be proud of that product. And don't be so quick to just share it and just go on Product Hunt or whatever. Like really put your heart into it and try to create a real experience that people resonate with and solve a real problem. You know, like don't just be like, well, Max is doing 100 days of no code. I'll do 200 days of no code. You know, like, you know what I mean? Like I see this so many times. Like we don't need 100 more newsletters. We need something original. Right. And I cannot wait to see what you guys create. And I hope that what we share with you today could be helpful on your journey.
Wow, yeah, amazing. Yeah, no words. I'll share this recording because I feel like well, very soon, because I feel like so many people will need to like dip into different bits just to catch it again. So yeah, thanks again so much, guys, for coming. This has been amazing. And yeah, I will let you know when the recording is out, and I'll share that with you as well, Sacco, separately. But thanks again, guys. Let's see you all on Twitter, building cool, amazing products. Yeah, have a good one, guys, and speak soon.
I appreciate it.
Cheers.
Yeah, bye.
Thank you.